What up? What up? Welcome back to the Sneaker History Podcast. My name's Nick Engvall. I'm super stoked today to get to talk to one of my good friends in this sneaker thing, this footwear industry. Brett Golliff is with me. He has been around the block a time or two and has some incredible insights. If you're not following him on Instagram, it's at Golliff, Golliff. But I'm going to let him introduce himself. He has just always been one of my favorite people to speak to in this whole sneaker thing, and has always an interesting perspective coming at it from the design side, and is not afraid to just be a fan of other designers and other sneakers and all that stuff too. So it's one of the things I really admire about him. But I'll let him tell a little bit about himself so you can kind of understand who he is. Brett, how's it going, man?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thank you for having me on the show. I really, really appreciate it. It's always fun to talk with you and get my views out in another way. But yeah, just to give a quick intro, I'm Brett Golliff. I kind of live in two different worlds of automotive design and footwear design. By day, I'm a car designer at General Motors, a manager of Chevrolet and Corvette, and I've worked on Hummers and other various things like that. And then by night and by life to some extent is this footwear world where that was the start of my career. It's still a part of my career. And I share my views and visions because, I don't know, it excites me. And it gives me an extra passion, another thing to talk about. It's helped me to connect with so many people like yourself. And I just kind of keep it going. So it's been a good time.
Awesome, man. So I guess, like, in terms of the footwear stuff that you've worked on, what are some of the things that you would have worked on in the early years? And also, one thing that I do want to get into and kind of lead into, you let go of a lot of things recently that I think most people, we talked about this when we talked with Russ, months back on the Sneaker Combos thing, but there's a lot of letting go going on in the sneaker world too. So maybe we can get into that a little bit later on, but
happy to. All right. So I'll just give like the quick rundown. I basically decided I wanted to get into footwear design as like a seventh grader in high school. And that was from reading Russ's 100% MJ issue from Slam and the interview with Tinker in there and David Bond as well. And that it changed my life. I didn't know that could exist as that time. I mean, I had always grown up drawing and painting, private art lessons from the age of 3 and on, and was just really into it. That's all I did was draw. And still really all I do is draw. And it bridged so much of my life when I read that article. So I kind of just sought everything out from that point on. And I made my way to CCS after high school and had some great high school experiences too. I mean, my high school art teacher, Jeanette Merritt, who, I'm from a small town in Indiana. Nobody knew what I wanted to do. Nobody understood any of it. And she would let me create my own curriculum. She was like, all right, you want to design shoes? I'll figure out how to critique it. And so I would do that. I mean, I had 25 high school art credits before I graduated, and then going to CCS. And that was just so serendipitous because basically day one, I ran into Dwayne Lawrence, who did Wade 1, Wade 2, Wade 3. And, he became a big mentor, took me under his wing. That led to Jason Maiden, who is a man, just family at this point, just good friend and good overall. If I'm ever we don't talk to each other every day, but we talk to each other, bi-monthly at a minimum. And if I'm ever at a spot, I'm like, hey, what is your opinion on this? I text him and it's it's right there, man. Just this beautiful guiding light. And that then led me to a few other people and other pieces that were pivotal in that moment. And I ended up, coming out of CCS, and it was an interesting time. That's basically 07, 08 when everything went down in the financial crunch of America and I guess the globe. And I took my first job at New Balance, and I was in the advanced product group. And it was awesome, eye-opening, very different. It was eye-opening on a personal level. It's not to critique anybody there. This is my own issues, but I kind of ran into a scenario of I am this over the top, my whole life is based around shoes. That's all it is. And not having other people there was just weird. Not having other people that were like that. It just didn't relate to it. You realize that there was, and that doesn't mean that they weren't passionate. It doesn't mean it, but I didn't have anybody that equivalent the way I looked at it. spent like 4.5 years there. It was awesome. It was a great time. I learned so much. I made so many great relationships and gained a lot out of it. I started blogging at the same time. And growing up as a kid, I was always into basically automotive and footwear at the exact same time. And I never understood, like, as I got past that 100% like MJ and like the kickstitch shoes and like the back section of Slam. So basically, realistically, what that says is there's like one publisher that's willing to talk about footwear in that way, right? But automotive had everything, like everything that you could come up with, right? From America to overseas to just anywhere else, they all had their own version of it. And so when I was at New Balance, I was like, all right, well, my wife was in the midst of getting her master's. I was like, I have nothing to do, so I'm gonna start blogging. And I knew nothing about that stuff, but I basically, by the time I met you, this is well after I had been doing it for, I was like, oh, people get paid for this. Oh, this is like a real thing. And Gotti, like one of our other friends, he was like, no, you have like a following, like you have a real following. And I was like, oh shit, like this is something that I guess I'm doing something right. And so that was interesting because that opened my network up. Like that really brought me into a new stratosphere of stuff. So I had like an opportunity. I basically, in 2011 or 2010, at the end of it, I had to make 3 decisions. Do I go to Nike? Do I go to Adidas? Or do I go to GM? And GM had sought me out because they were looking for different people. I went to it as an opportunity to learn at a bigger global scale and learn how another creative process is. Never planned it. Just kind of happened. And I've been there for, 11 years since. But at the same time, I still help a lot of footwear stuff out. A lot of stuff. I mean, I've had my hands on nearly everything in that time. So yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah, definitely, man. Well, and it's crazy too, because I always think, your story is super relevant to where I try with sneaker history to kind of find the people that are looking to like connect with those people with the same passion about footwear or whatever it is they're passionate about. Right. And I think that when it comes down to it, like blogging is just such a powerful tool for that. It's the same thing as like podcasts now, right? The ability to let someone really get to know you through your words is something that we take for granted because we're in this, we're in tweets and we're in Instagram feeds and like everything is so short where like the next generation has an even shorter attention span. But yet, like the most important part is when you go past that and you have a 10-minute, a 20-minute read or an hour-long listen with somebody where you can really kind of understand, oh, these are the things that kind of make them go. And that's why I see the things that they do. And it like connects the dots. And then next, like you said, it's like, well, you're reaching out to people and you've got people reaching out to you that are like-minded, have similar passions or overlaps. And next thing you know, it's like opportunity comes from those things. And it's funny because I never really thought about that with your journey so much because I know on the work side, I've known your story and I've known that you did the blogging thing for a while, but I never really thought about how even just like kind of layering that aspect of what work is on top of what you do for your day job or night job or whatever, how much it acts the same way as it has for me, right? Like the more I write, the more people I meet, the more opportunities come from it, the more people I can connect other people to just be like, hey, talk to this person. That's the person you need to know for that specific thing. And that's what I really get a lot of, just fulfilling feelings from is like being able to connect people when they're trying to do something, with whatever it is that I can help them make happen.
I think I found that there was a few things like I'd get frustrated of like, it did a few things for me. There was a lot of arrogance tied to it, where I felt like everybody wants to know about this stuff. Like, why wouldn't you want to know why an outrigger is created the way it is or how it lasts is? Like, everybody loves the shoe that they bought, and every person that bought this product has this want to know how it is or how it's made, which is so stupid. Like, it does not exist. So like I had this view of like, no, I have to share this with the world. This is my duty to do. But what that did though was like it ignited like realistically, design in general is communication. Like you're communicating an aesthetic, you're communicating a reason to the powers that be that are allowing you to create the product. You're communicating to them why that aesthetic needs to exist and live. I mean, that's what it is. And that blogging gave me a whole nother way to figure out how to communicate. Like it really opened me up to an entire different world that was critiquing in a different way, had a different viewpoint on what they didn't give a shit. Like, to be frank, like, it's like, no, I bought the shoe. Okay, why should I like the shoe? I'm like, well, you made it to this webpage, so that's number one reason. You know, you like it a little bit more, right? So being able to communicate that stuff. But then on the flip side, realizing how much of an anomaly I probably was and still am to some extent, I know that there's still others like me. So giving that voice to those other people that may not know where to find it. It still amazes me. Like one of the first articles that I wrote for you and Russ was, it was probably the second or third one. It was basically, how do you become a designer? And I think that was like September of 12.
Yeah.
13, and I'm talking complex at this point. I still get kids to contact me on that. So that means that like in the 10 years that I wrote that, let's just assume that everybody is like at a minimum a freshman in high school or something like that. In the 10 years that I wrote that, like the person that first contacted me is well out of college at this point, right? And like now I'm still getting kids that are finding that article and asking me where they should go and do this and how they should go and do that. You find the power of what that is and how it connects. And in the same way that the way I grew up and didn't have anybody else around me that had anything to compare to what I was trying to achieve and do, now I can be that for somebody in a different way. And that's really beautiful to me. Instagram and Twitter and other things have changed it in the sense of what blogging is. Where it's quicker, it's easier to connect with, but it's dialogue is different on there, I guess is the best way of saying it. But it was something that provided me with a great amount of fulfillment. I did get burned out. I think if I were to critique it, where it fell apart for me was when I got into the point where I was being seeded too much, I think is the best way to say it. Because it's not that I didn't value being seated. It's not I didn't like it. Like, it's a really good feeling. But the weight of it. And I felt like it got to a point where I was like, fuck, I'm just writing the same thing. Like, it's like nothing was challenging me. Most of the times, I felt that I was better when I could be selfish. Meaning that if I could sit back and take 6 weeks to plan out, because like I was always writing like 10 to 20,000 words. I wasn't doing these short little things. So if I could sit out and really like plan out a lot of stuff, and like working with Gerald, I mean, he was super patient with me and Gerald Sullivan and stuff, because I'd be like, no, I need like 5 months. Like they probably looked at me so annoying because they were just putting stuff on a calendar to fill it.
Yeah,
right.
Yep.
And like I was, I'd be like, yeah, I would hit him up like the night before. I'm like, it's not ready. I don't. And the thing that like the best part that I have is this was never my income, and I never planned for it to be a part of my income. If I got $50 for it, okay, cool. But it wasn't like how I was surviving. So I did not care if I hurt somebody's timeline. If it wasn't ready for me, I wasn't putting it out. But my point is that when it got to the point of where, you're getting kind of like 2 or 3 shoes a week, and I kind of just quickly realized, I'm like, oh man, this is becoming a commodity. This isn't about like the message anymore. And I just kind of let it go. I'll still write every once in a while. I contacted a few people this past weekend about some pieces that I'm intrigued to write, like stuff that like challenges me and makes me think differently. But overall, that's kind of where that stuff slowed down for me.
Yeah, I totally relate though. I mean, it's one of those things where, I think, and you mentioned Russ and reading Russ's stuff for so long, you can totally understand where he's at with, the frustration of all of it, because it became something that was so, just
pure.
It's missing so much. And I think that's kind of the nature of, kind of going back, I guess, to what you're saying about New Balance, right? I ran into that same, kind of feeling of like, how many of us are actually really passionate about this? And I don't think that everybody in a company or on a team even has to be passionate about, let's say it's sneakers. We don't all have to be passionate about sneakers, but everybody has to be passionate enough about something that is, easily connected to that, right? If you're passionate about connecting with people, that's great for any product, right? You can work on any product that you enjoy if you're passionate about connecting with people. But, in my experience too, running into that same situation multiple times where it's like, it can be disheartening, but at the same time, it's also kind of motivation for me to keep moving and keep finding people that are still interested in things that I'm interested in, or, like you're saying, like, challenging to you and, making you think differently and questioning how you've thought going into something, on the outcome, because those are the things that really drive us all, right? It's, we have the thing, a shoe, a car, or whatever it is that we like and we enjoy. And then like the conversations and the things that go on around those things are the things that really like get us kind of like outside of that comfort zone. And I think that's kind of it's interesting because I think a lot of people in the footwear experience, let's say, have had that, right? Where it's like, oh, I got this job at a brand or a retailer or a design firm or whatever. And there's only one or two people, let's say. And to your point, going back, it's like less and less the further back you go, right? It's like, it's people that looked at this as a job.
More of it now.
Yeah. And now definitely you'll have more people that are passionate about it, but also at the same time, that kind of can be challenging because you have more people hitting the wall and running to another company to say like, okay.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there's more of it now, but it's not in the right way. Like I actually think of it's pop music now, where it's like
that's interesting.
I know I'm supposed to like sneakers. That's every kid sells on StockX. I'm supposed to. Well, why do you like it? Well, that's what we do. But why do you like it? Well, I follow it. There's a TikTok on it, so obviously it's really important to me. But why? Like I actually had that conversation with Tinker like a couple of years back where it's like they were having a hard time with people coming into the brand that knew nothing about sports or the brand in general. Yeah. And like you're seeing that, and that's fine. I mean, it's pop music. That's where it's at. I tend to look at a few things where like I overread Michael Jordan into my life in too many different ways. But one of them was like, honestly, his failure of being an exec at the Wizards. And he was still too close to the game, where it was like, you could go play 24 minutes, right? Or, you could still lace it up and average 24 points, but you're probably going to need about 60 shots to do it. And he did it because he thought he could do better. He could teach everybody else how they're supposed to be playing the game, right? And what I realized is that like that level of passion is innate to him. So he's in the top 330 basketball players in the world. And that level of passion is so innate that even people that have made it that far, that are considered to be only basketball players, there's still people on that court that don't have that level of passion. So as I sat in like boardrooms, and still now, like even as I talk about shoes with other people or I talk about other products, like what drives me doesn't always drive them. But what makes me a success now is being willing to accept that. And what you have to do is probably find a way to get them to take some of your passion and enable themselves with it. Because it's probably what your actual gift is. But if you just keep it like internally to yourself, and that's what drives you, it will drive you crazy because you can't find that person to relate to. You can't find that human being that like views even anything remotely in the same way. And it's like when you start taking that and enabling other people, even if it's 10%, that's when it becomes better. But to state what you're saying about other footwear pieces, no, I haven't found that. They tend to all congregate in one area in Beaverton. And it's like, and even then you can see where it becomes a challenge because, they're now fighting algorithms and board members. It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah. It's interesting. It makes me think of, when the pandemic kind of hit and like I don't like the word consulting, but it's like, that's what I do. Right. And so like in my consulting work, almost all of it went away because as somebody who's not an actual employee, you're the most disposable thing, right? Like it's easy to end a contract. And that's the blessing and the curse of working remote, working as a contractor, a consultant remotely, especially because out of sight, out of mind, it's not like they're going to see me walk into the office and they've got to cut things off face to face because, nobody wants to do that. Even in the times that I've had to do those things when I had an actual, full-time gig somewhere, it's a terrible, nobody wants to do that. But at the beginning of the pandemic, not even at the beginning, like a few months into the pandemic, as I was like trying to figure out, okay, like, do I keep going down this, like this path of like not being fully involved in a company where I have the freedom to, work with anybody at any moment, or do I go back to having a full-time role again? So I applied for a few different roles with various companies, and I don't want to put anybody on blast, but like I had an interview with a company where, it's over Zoom calls. So it's awkward to begin with because that was, like we talked about before we started recording it, a lot of company culture is just not supportive of that. And like, there's a lot of people that are just not comfortable with it. So it was one of those, it's almost like comedic in a sense now, because I look back and it's like the person got on the call with me and then realized that they hadn't changed their Zoom background from their regular office to this sneaker wall thing, because it was a sneaker based, and it was a very sneaker heavy position at a big company. Right. And like that in itself to me was like a huge red flag of like, you're talking to me and thinking that I care what's behind you is going to be any way influential to my decision to work for you or with you or whatever that is. But like the fact that it happened and was like, it was like, I was like, just kind of, it stuck in my mind so much afterwards. It was like, wow, that's kind of like, it was kind of like, dodge the bullet there, right? Because that's kind of the mentality that we're talking about, big corporations and big businesses where you have a bunch of people that think, oh, I've got to be a certain way to talk to a sneakerhead or whatever that is, and like, that's not it, right? Like it's always about the people. Even if it's the shoes, it's about the people, like we wouldn't care about Jordans if it wasn't for what Mike did in them and what he said and how he walked around and, how he walked from the stadium to his Ferrari, like all those things have an impact on, at least for me, wanting to wear a pair of Jordans, and it's funny to see like it become such a commodity and such a big deal, but still have people that think that it's like, you don't want somebody that doesn't understand the nuances of these positions, right? Like if you have a person that's into sneakers and that's what they really want to be about, well, then generally speaking, they're probably not going to be like a CEO of a company that does, fitness gear and apparel and, bags and accessories. It's like, that's it's a very nuanced passion that you're trying to like pin on someone, even in that conversation, to hire somebody to do something sneakers. And it's funny that we still are in this place, even though it's like you were saying, it's like people just do this because it's the thing to do. And they like sneakers because it's the thing to do. And they, you have a StockX and a GOAT and an eBay because it's sneakers and a thing to do.
I find it interesting because I think a lot of some scenarios I've been in, whether it's footwear or automotive, that it's my passion that can also be my deterrent that keeps me from succeeding because it intimidates the others because they can't relate to it. Like, and then you become known as the guy that dominates like a conversation or the person that drives for things too hard. And it's like, well, no, maybe you just don't align with what actually needs to be happening. Like, I can confidently say that's what's kept me out of a few places in the past of working with them is that we just don't align, and that's okay.
Yep.
All right, it's totally cool if you want to be passive and make passive product, have at it. Like, but it's one of those deals where it's like. And I'll be curious because we do live in a culturally sensitive society more so than ever. And some for good reason, absolutely needed to be. But on the flip side, it's like having an opinion anymore is an interesting statement of how you view something and how you want to communicate it and how you do it. There's ways to still have a very good opinion and still be empathetic and sympathetic for the people that are around it. But I worry that we're now at a state where it's like you don't share a view or an opinion because you're worried about how it's going to go. And at the end of the day, you're creating a product. You're saying you have an opinion for why something needs to exist. So if you can't share a view on what that is, then how do you navigate? How do you course correct? How do you make these things proper? You're probably muddling the world at a time where there's too many products on the planet that we're literally killing the planet because of it. So,
yeah. Well, so that kind of leads me into one of the things I wanted to talk about with you is you know, your navigation of the comments on your Instagram page when you post things that are, you know, not the cool thing that everybody's buying and selling on the secondary market. Right. Because I think there's, you know, and this is not to, you know, discredit anybody else, but there's still a very small amount of people that can look at a product, footwear specifically, and be just, you know, just like infatuated to understand it even more. Right. And, you know, whether people understand that or not, like there's such a, you know, I don't know. It sounds weird, but like there's such a small amount of people that I think I could get on the phone with or hop on a Zoom call with like this, or, you know, and literally speak for hours upon hours upon hours because we understand where each other are coming from, even when we have a negative or, you know, or a questionable feeling about a particular product or, you know, design or way a company works or any of those things. But specifically, obviously the shoe that came to mind, but you've been doing this for years, where like you see something and you're like, okay, this is a game changing thing, whatever that is. And coming from it from a design perspective is completely different from the average consumer. That's like, oh, Travis Scott didn't wear that, so I don't need to know about it. And that's nothing against Travis Scott. I love the guy's music, but you also kind of, I guess, take extra steps for people in those comments on your page that a lot of people definitely don't. And, you know,
I have a question about Travis Scott real quick. Do you feel like, because Travis like pushes like music boundaries, right?
Yeah.
Like he kind of, in his production, like all that pieces. Do you think that like correlates with a Jordan 1? Like, is a Jordan 1 really pushing any boundaries? You know what I mean? It's like,
I don't think there's a correlation there, but I agree. Like that's what's interesting about what you were saying about the expected sneakerhead experience now, right? Because I do think that he is aware of it, right? And like, you know, and age has nothing to do with it, but he is definitely had a lot of crazy experiences in a very compact amount of time. You know, he's 24, 25 years old, and he's had access to things that most people will never have access to. And I think he probably understands the same nuance that you just mentioned about the kid feeling like they have to be a part of it, which if you're trying to set yourself up and your family for the next couple hundred years, maybe that is where you step it back and say, well, it's safer to do a Jordan 1 or a Trainer 1 or an Air Max 1. And I know I'm going to get these royalties out of this or whatever, you know, whatever the deal is, I'm going to make my money here, but I can still be experimental on the music because the kids are really, I should stop saying kids because like I'm 42 years old and I'm listening to him on a regular basis, but like he is absolutely experimental with his music, right? Like I think that's what drew me into him. Yeah. There's catchy stuff. There's things that I just really like. His energy is absolutely insane, but I definitely don't relate to the products that he sells the way that I think someone that's 22 or 23 years old does, but I still love his music.
I think we're going to tie all this together here. I think we have our next hour laid out just off of that. Yeah. But, you know, you were leading to the comments and you were leading to essentially the Yeezy foam runner spot, right? So I think the last time, well, I guess it's 3 times ago, we had the media one, you know, with Russ and Gotti and Ian and Alex and stuff. Previous to that, we had the Kobe one. And then previous to that, we had one where we just taught design. And you asked me within that of if I were to design shoes, like what it would be. And the obvious answer was a Jordan. Like it's, you know, it's my whole kind of life and world and like everything else, right? So it surrounds me at all times. That's the obvious answer. There's the excitement. But what I had told you was actually easy, and because they have the most opinion on footwear. And anymore, that's what I look for. And that's why I kind of made the joke about Travis, because I felt like it segued here, where it's like, good job, you reversed a swoosh. Like, and the color blocking is based off of other color blockings that you've been basically, you know, brainwashed to love. We all love the Fragment Jordan 1. The Fragment Jordan 1's incredible. It's Hiroshi Fujira. Nobody knows anything about him, but it's perfect because there's 3,000 pairs of them. So you have to love that royal blue Chicago Jordan 1 version, right? I mean, it's the perfect Air Jordan ever. Better get it signed by him when you see him. But anyway, so, you know, everybody run and grab that one. At least when you get a brown one, you know that's Travis's like actual view on things. But anyway, I love the Jordan brand. They're so near and dear to my heart. I critique the shit out of them solely just because I'm just not understanding where it is anymore, because what we grew up on and loving was risk taking, was this understanding of been there, done that, take me further. Now we can't get a new Air Jordan without it tying back to the shoe that was 30 years previous to it, which is just asinine to me. That design team has to be so bored. Like, but anyway, I can't control any of that. But when I look at the Yeezy products, like those guys for the most part are taking like known footwear manufacturing and just pushing it to new levels. And so the Foam Runner was, I believe they're calling it the Foam Runner, whatever it is. This guy, like I saw it and I was like, oh, like, okay, I have to get this because I have to understand how it's made. Like at a minimum, this like deep of a draw within a mold is not something that's very easy to do. Knowing that this was like clearly knit, wanted to understand like how this felt. So I don't know what the amount of pairs are in the world, but from what I've been told, it's somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000. Like it's very low amount of what this is. So assuming that most people that are going to hear this and watch it, they probably haven't touched it. But basically, very soft, very plush around the collar. Then it transforms to a very, very durable, I guess is the best way of saying it. I don't know if it's waxed or what it is, but it is a more durable knit that goes around in the yellow. That at a minimum is pretty unique because you're changing yarns. But then what I always saw it as was essentially like a bag that somehow is wrapped around an internal midsole. And I had to like get it. Like I had to have it. I had to understand what it was. And it's probably hard to show on the camera, but if you look inside this, the amount of seams that are happening on the inside shows you like how much like form and other pieces that are going into it. I mean, like they've done something very original. You don't have to like the aesthetic. Take the aesthetic out of it. I did not buy this for how it looks. I bought this to understand how it was made. That doesn't exist anymore. And, you know, I don't want to get too far ahead, but the other shoe I'll bring up is probably the Kobe 2 that I just bought, the Adidas Kobe 2. But, like, you have to have more people that are questioning how things are done and questioning how they can change to do something original. That's not happening in footwear right now. And that's predominantly not to blame Nike, not to blame Jordan, not to blame Adidas or Puma or anybody else. That's the consumer. That was probably one piece that like really turned me off from the Complex experience. Complex and riding was phenomenal because the group was great. All of us, our email chains were some of my favorite footwear email chains that I ever had. Us all talking was amazing. The reach that you had was extraordinary. God, did we get, in my view, this is me critiquing it, and I know that I'm a niche within a niche within a niche. there were so many uneducated like comments where it was just like, it helped me to realize that people don't look at it the way I look at it, and some people are just buying a shoe, and that's okay, right? Like, we need them. Like, that is okay. You can just buy a shoe and be content. You don't need to look past it. I know my son's that way. Like, my son doesn't, he's 7, so he doesn't have the depth of it, but I know he's never, like, he'll entertain the conversations when we get older just because he loves me. But the reality is, he's like, oh, yeah, that's cool. I'm going to go play in the mud. Like, it's nothing more. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, but my statement to it is like, we need more people that are looking past what that stuff is. Like Travis, let's just put Travis in the long line of Nike collaborators, right? You got Travis, you obviously have Drake now, who has no vision in general. But you have him, you have the Kanye, obviously, John Elliott, Jerry Lorenzo, you got Virgil right in the middle of it. You have Don C, pick all these other people that have done it. Kim Jones, let's see here. Mark Newson, to me, is actually the best one that's done anything with him, because he does challenge it and he does try to do things new. But my statement is like, Nike gives those dudes the blueprints. Like, at some point, Travis has to do his own thing. Like, he has to, because he's going to reach his growth. Like, there's only so many shoes he can redo. Yep. There's only so many things he's in love with. So it's like, it's coming. So hopefully when they're training him properly, they have a vision, because I think some of the most beautifully constructed shoes are from those people that have left and went and done stuff lately. So
yeah, no, I agree. And I think, and just to play devil's advocate, because I definitely am not the consumer that's buying a Travis Scott shoe. I mean, not only do I not care about the retro product that he's spinning, I don't like brown shoes, clothes, whatever. Like, brown is like one of my least favorite colors. So I have no skin in the game in that sense.
Nick, like, I feel like you need a nice fall shoe. It comes in well.
I have like no skin in the game in that sense, right? But one of the things I'd been thinking about recently, and I'm actually kind of glad we got to Travis Scott somehow, because I haven't had this conversation with anyone. But because he is so much younger in his experience, and especially in footwear, right? Kanye was already, 10 years, 12 years beyond him, and probably 4 or 5 years worth of, trying to make things happen with the brand, samples here, samples there, working with designers on this and that and the other. And I think that my hope is that Travis really is like, is just, this sounds really bad because I don't mean this to like, yeah. But I hope he's just there for the money, right? Like, I hope he's just there, and I hope that he's rehashing retro product because he's going to pile up money and go do the design stuff that he wants to do in the future, if that's what he chooses to do, right? I don't know the guy, so maybe he doesn't even care about design stuff. Maybe he's just like, throw the swoosh on backwards and it's lit, like that's.
Well played. I think the journey is interesting because, like, if you think of Ye, like, Ye isn't that different than us. Like, we're all within the same age of 5 to 8 years. And what that means is, like, at the time of when Kanye's coming into being the Kanye that we all know, let's just say Blueprint era. So let's say 01, 02, 03 Jay-Z era, right? And him becoming that. It's the same time we're all coming up on Nike Talk and other various websites. So my point is like, we were the small niche in the world still at that time. If Nike was doing a retro product, it was probably 50,000 of us buying it. So that's very small. But flip the script. As we just said, Travis is 25. So Travis is roughly, I don't know if Travis is 25, but whatever his age is, he's right around there. Let's just say he's like 11 years old when it starts getting to be the thing that takes over him. It's like 2011, 2012. Like, he's educated and born into this era of retro product. Yeah. It's fascinating because we've hit a generation of people that know the new shoe as essentially being a shoe from 1985 or a shoe from 1996 or vice versa, right? We don't have somebody that's coming in and still seeing a Flightposite like Kanye saw and is still like, oh shit, remember how that thing was done? Like, let me go rethink things, right? Yeah. We don't have that happening for people. I was able to spend some time with Devin Booker last week and actually talked with him a little bit about some of this stuff. And it's like, yeah, it's very similar to him. Like, he's he'll say it like, yeah, you're kind of put into that type of stuff. But he's lucky in the sense that the way he performed and what he came up with was the Kobe product.
Yeah.
And that stuff, it's probably some of the best product Nike's ever made. And they've made phenomenal product year in and year out. So it's just fascinating because they don't have a reason to challenge the parameters of what is determined as lifestyle product. But then on the flip side, the product that is their performance product, they need to sell really well. They need it to take over. And in the basketball market, that stuff doesn't sell if it's not tied to that stuff.
Yeah.
But then if you go across campus and go to the running stuff looks like flipping UFOs right now. And you're having people beat world records. And like you have people that run for other companies spray painting their stuff black and putting an ASICS logo on it, right? Like, so on the flip side, it's like you're watching them challenge that parameter over there, but you see a whole market of people that don't want the parameters challenged. That's what I find fascinating in today's game. And it's like, I don't know. I have a couple pairs of the Travis Scott stuff. I usually buy stuff. I will not pay like a resale for that one. I paid resale for those Yeezys. I'll fully admit that, but I needed to have it and understand it. But like with the Travis Scott stuff, I got lucky on sneakers. It came through. Me and I have a nice little crew of Gotti and two others, Omar and Yang, that help me with everything. And we help each other in general. And we got lucky, just simply put. But I buy it to understand it and experience it and see what it is. To note like, well, what are you actually doing here? I would argue like when Virgil started doing stuff, he was challenging parameters. But like, as I look at him, his aesthetic has become the brand.
Yeah.
And it's like, he needs to look at himself now and like, he probably has other visions. He has other views, but he can't challenge those views because it's what people expect of him.
Yeah.
And it's what's going to make the product sell. Right. And it's like, that's where it becomes this weird commodity, and it's like, where do you draw the line of does it need to be made and not be made at that point?
Yeah.
Right.
How do you like how let's say you were just thrown into that mix to say, let's break this mold, so to speak. How do you view that? How do you find the right people, kind of navigate that as somebody who's had a whole lot of experience kind of doing similar things in their day job, in a sense, right? You went through some of the biggest changes on that side of the world, I would say, for the brand, but like, it's almost eerily similar in how deep rooted this is who we are, the brand thought in that. And with Nike, like we all love it too. That's the hardest part, right? Like it's, I still get excited over a Jordan
it's our
1.
new Coke, right? It's like Coca-Cola, what it was like it's as American as apple pie at this point, right?
Exactly.
Like, that's what it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know that there's a great answer to it. I mean, the reality is that at the end of the day, it's about opinion. And the way I view stuff is, if you're being safe within it, you can feel it from the beginning. And I believe, like let's use the 36 right now, the Jordan 36. I'm sure it's manufactured beautifully. I'm sure it's just impeccable in the way that it's made, feels great. But that's not like, there's no emotional value to it. We're lacking the emotion. If we're talking them solely, they have a hard time of making new stars. They have a hard time of like moving past him.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Maybe it is him though, but just make him Enzo Ferrari, right?
Yeah.
Like, go and do that. But I think that to answer your question properly, I think that it's the way you approach any product. I think if I look at like the way the footwear industry, the amount of SKUs that they do every year is just such a ridiculous amount that you can't sit there and say as a business planner that every one of those is needed. So when that happens and you become a design team, I'm sure there's a handful of them that you're like, yeah, we do a good job on it. We put our effort into it, but we got it out the door. But on the flip side, you need to make sure that the ones that you have set the vision for the brand and have an understanding of what the brand is and where it's going to be. And I think a lot of times what happens with brand is that the way companies work, they rotate people in and out of brand. You don't have long enough to establish the brand. So by the time you get something out, new creative person comes in, boom, you start it over. Everybody has a different view, a different vision, and this is how we're going to do it. Consistency is king a lot of the times in this stuff. And I think that you need to find the right people that question it in the right way and are willing to take that task on. ACG is probably a perfect example of how Nike took something and modernized it in a unique way and has a lot of relevancy. If you look at Adi, I think Adi's in a phenomenal spot with everything that they're doing. The Pharrell product is gorgeous, just absolutely beautiful product. And it's curated to the market that loves it. Yeezy is obviously doing everything it's meant to be and pulling in people because they hit that mainstream that we've already critiqued of like, yeah, I have to have a pair of 350s. But then on the flip side, they're doing stuff that challenges the status quo. In fact, I'm looking around my office and like the 3 shoes that I've bought this year that have like, well, 3 of the 5 that I've bought this year that have changed the status quo, the 450, the foam runner, and now the knit runner. All of them from them, and all of them don't look like any other shoe on the planet, like at all. So they're doing that well. I guess my statement is to find your areas where you want to challenge the paradigm and know when it needs to be. My guess is a lot of stuff that we're talking about and critiquing, they don't want to challenge the paradigm. They're content with what it does. And where I find the shame in that is that those were the stuff that challenged the paradigm at one point.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think, you kind of see that they're not too worried about challenging, at least with basketball, in like a lot of the conversations that have been had around the consumer experience on the sneakers app recently. Right. And like the CEO coming out and saying, hey, I enjoy it when I hit on the sneakers app at, or whatnot. And then them coming out and like kind of saying, well, we're working on making it better and blah, blah, blah. But like, they're, those are things that, yes, they're spoken on an internal, air quotes, internal meeting, but it's like it's an investors meeting, right? Like that's a public call that anybody that has a Nike stock can hop on the call and listen to. And that's very well known that like, that's going to get out to the sneakerhead community because who cares about the sneakers app other than the sneakerhead kind of community. And I think that's really interesting because I do think there's some other stuff, obviously some of the stuff we want to talk about, but even just in like, I'm obviously a fan of a lot of the Reebok stuff, right? But like they are horrendous when it comes to retro product. I say that lovingly. Anybody from Reebok that listens, like it's like rinse and repeat for how long? Like how long can you go down this path and not be as successful as Jordan Retros, right? Like that's the problem. If it's making money for the business, then at least on a certain hand, Jordan Retro product might be funding some of the crazy stuff that happens in Nike running. I know that's a big picture scenario, right? But like Reebok, in my opinion, doesn't necessarily have that. But I think they've been doing some really weird stuff that like is definitely not in the comfort zone in any way with some of the Zig stuff that they're doing. And the fact that I'm even saying Zig 10 years after the toothpaste stuff.
That was Mark Baby and like some of his design stuff that he's done has just been impeccable. Yeah. Like, he nailed all that.
And it's wild because it's like it doesn't land anywhere on like, we've also got like the media side of it now that almost, I don't like picking on all these guys, but like we have friends that are at all of these places and it's the same. I see literally the same photo with the same caption, pasted over it with a swipe through to the rest of the photos on every major platform right now. And I follow all the major platforms. So it's like, I see it 6 times in my feed and we all know that XYZ Yeezy or Jordan is coming out. We don't need to know that, Travis Scott has an Air Max 1 with a backwards swoosh. Like we've seen it. We've all seen it multiple times, and it's like, oh, well, he wore it to like ice cream today. So we're going to see new pictures of it.
But that's like also conducive of the area that we live in or the era that we live in, where it's like, those guys are basically like making like a great newsletter 20 years ago. And now they're like full on businesses that provides like income for many people. It's a weird thing. Like imagine if Nike shut the doors today. Do we have like can those guys withstand without them? Like can they no? Yeah. Right? Like it's so fascinating that Nike I mean, in some ways, like, I'm sorry to say this, as brutal as it is, I love all of them and I'm friends with a lot of them, but it's like you're a parasite to like the main protein piece, because at the end of the day, if the protein dies, like, it's gone. Like, why do I need to come to your website anymore?
Yeah.
And what's fascinating to me is that, as you point out the Reebok scenario, case in point, those guys haven't had to have the conversation with Reebok because it doesn't generate anything, right?
Yeah.
Like, at that point. My guess is if I were to put the Reebok stuff into context, is that there's a handful of people that's 3% of the working population there or so that truly care about like Reebok in the way that it once was. And that's okay. But there's not enough people celebrating the internal voices that they've done. My experience with the footwear industry at times was that you had too many people that they were wishing Nike's sales, which is an easy thing to wish for. And when I say it's an easy thing to wish for, is because everybody wants that. Everybody wants that level of volume and that level of sale and that level of customer that cares for what you do. Every last person does. And sometimes I felt like that blocked the stuff that I was involved with. It blocked people from caring for their actual customer core. Like, well, take care of the people that you actually have, right? Like, build them up and make them go further. And I think that's kind of the sad. That's not the sad side. It's not sad because it's the business. That's the side though that a lot of us don't ever see, and a lot of us are so in love with what we're in love with that becomes that driving force, like, of what what you're doing, and it's like, you kind of realize that that's not the driving force for the business because it's not what's keeping the lights on.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Well, it makes me think, like, I guess like concept kicks, right? Or, one of those, like, those are the places that I like kind of always end up on for like really kind of stimulation in terms of the way people think about sneakers, because at least it's showing that there are people out there that are not just, and I don't mean that in a like demeaning way to the people that make custom shoes, right? Like, it's a craft to be able to take a shoe apart and put it together in a different way. Like, I will never be able to do that no matter how hard I would try. Like, it's just not my thing. I am not that person. But like, we're also we're in this weird place, like almost like layers of the awkwardness, right? Because we have now the creators that are creating their own products with a varied Air Force One or Jordan silhouette is not, it seems like a money grab, right? And that's the part that's like, I just am like, I look at it and I'm like, I don't know, like the Dwell magazine keeps popping into my head. So it's like, where's the Dwell magazine for sneakers, right? Like, that's what we need.
It doesn't exist, man. And this sounds really demeaning. So I will state this. This is where my automotive world kicks in. That's a little bit different. Is that I found with like real people that are affording like the real like car collectors, like, not only do I have like a LaFerrari, but I have like 300 other cars. We don't have as sophisticated of a crowd that buys the sneaker side of stuff. And that's not to demean anybody. But the difference is that for the most part, what's an expensive shoe in your head, Nick? Like, give me a price. What's the expensive shoe in your head?
Yeah, like maybe $500.
All right. Just about any one of us that are buying shoes on a regular basis, regardless to what your income level is, can figure out how to get $500 for a pair of shoes.
Yeah.
On the flip side, as we talk about the markets, as you brought up Dwell and other things like that, there's not many of us that can afford a $25,000 couch. Yep. There's not many of us that can afford, that $100,000 watch that they only made two of. And there's not many of us that can afford even owning the 5 Ferraris to get on the list to be able to buy the LaFerrari. You know what I mean? So it's like, we tend, and you notice it in footwear a lot. Like, you notice it, especially from the high performance brands, they compare themselves a lot to that stuff. Inspiration wise, they draw in from a lot of those things. So we're trained to kind of pay attention to some of that stuff. But that's where the difference is. I remember when we were going through the financial crunch, And I was at New Balance and talking to somebody that I really respected there, been in the industry for like 20 years. I'm like 22. I'm like, oh shit, like world's falling apart. Like what this is going to be like? And he's like, we're going to be fine. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you will find like through times like this, like people are still going to celebrate themselves every once in a while. Somebody can come up with $200 to buy a pair of shoes and come up with $80. Like we're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. There's plenty of data where it proves that. And you tend to see it. I mean, it's something that gives an emotional fill that's immediate, whereas opposed to thinking about that $20,000 purchase that is a car or something for the house or something like that they can't do, but they can do that other thing that makes them feel good. And I think that that's something that we don't always grasp like within our area and our world of life, because we hone in so much on other pieces. That's my take.
Yeah, no, I agree, definitely. And I think, it's when you think about it that way too, like it's just, I even when we don't talk for months at a time, it's like I see something you'll post and I'll be like, oh, of course Brett needs the knit runner, right? Like, and your admiration for that, right, is the same way that I kind of approach certain things that I've always wanted to collect, right? Or, what's a shoe? Like even going back to like the Hirachi, the Adapt, right? I don't need that shoe. I will never look, I am like mentally, I'm ready for Velcro Stan Smiths that I don't have to tie, but I don't ever need an app to tie my shoes. But do I need that shoe because I'm so fascinated by it and the people that I know that are connected to it and the journey that it's taken to get to that point? Yes, I have to have it, right? Like, of course, it's insane to think of paying $350 for a shoe or $500 for a shoe. But when that's become such a big part of your life and you want to just be like, that tangible, like, okay, I need to see this in person. I need to put my foot in this. I need to like, bend this three, 4 ways and figure out like actually what's going on here. I think that's the interesting part of like where we're at in that, and I wonder like too, like, are the people that are coming into the brands missing that kind of passionate curiosity that we have? And I don't mean that in a, like, I'm worth, holier than thou way. I just mean like, if you are a Travis Scott or the age of Travis Scott, where you came up and it was all retro product, like having your own color of a retro product is probably a pretty cool thing to look up to, look forward to in life. And when do you hit that wall of like, okay. And I think it's not just a Travis Scott conversation, right? This is like a bigger thing of like, when do we collectively as people who buy a lot of retro sneaker product hit a wall where it's like, okay, either it's, I've had enough of, the frustrations with the sneakers app, or I've had enough of buying into some community or buying into some bot or buying into some resale platform where I'm just done playing that game and I'm going to go buy something that's really just like, what the hell is that? That's what I want to buy again. Cause that's kind of what we bought sneakers for in the early days, right? It was like, you had a pair of Jordans on, you were the kid that people were like, what the hell is that? Like,
yeah, I think it's interesting. I think to you hit on a lot of parts, but as like people come into companies, like let's take Travis out to it because that's like an endorsee deal. But let's talk about like a new designer starting. I think where I worry about them is not the way I look at like a career journey. When you come into like a culture, it's like a year to learn that culture. It's like 3 years to kind of like have your effect on the culture. And then it's like 4 to 5 years to master that culture. And then it's time to like shift how you change or where you maybe go to another area of it. But you got to come in and like be a student of it, figure out how you can implement what you learned and then master it. Right. And as I sit there and think of it, it's like, do they have the proper resources to challenge things? We're all surrounded by an algorithm, no matter what it is. Pick whatever you're going to look at stuff. But as you like one thing, they start preloading, this is what you like. So it's like, do you have the real opportunities to break your own mold and the confidence to be able to do that as well? Because you're going against the grain. And will you be accepted to do that? That's kind of my fear for a lot of it. This year I haven't bought a single retro product. And it wasn't necessarily on purpose, but I haven't. I have went backwards and I bought the Kobe 2. But what's fascinating to me, and I didn't realize it until I bought it. So I got the Kobe 2 in a couple of weeks, and I'm now venturing in on like 600 likes and like comments. And for me, that's a lot. Like I usually am around 150 to 200. But it's generated a lot of conversation. Like this shoe, and I put up a shitty photo, like just a terrible thing of like I had just gotten back from Phoenix, and like I saw it, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna throw this up. And what's fascinating to me is that this shoe, and I didn't realize until I grasped it or until I bought it, is existing at the exact same time as this shoe. And they're both molded products, both entirely a molded piece where like that's the aesthetic. You know that internally Adidas was considering this their posit competitor, but they look worlds apart.
Yep.
I would argue right now, if I walk into a Foot Locker, from Nike product to Puma product to Adidas product to even New Balance product from a basketball standpoint, they're all sharing a similar aesthetic. That's something that is totally different, where you might want it to make sure that you were competing in the same way of like, I need a 0 to 60 time of 3 seconds, right? But you're not doing it in the same way. And that's something that has completely changed. That's where I can confidently say, as a 37-year-old man right now, comparing to what I bought back then and what kids are now, is there isn't a difference. You're very much trying to fight for the same thing. And that would be worrisome if I'm a CEO at any one of those places.
Yeah.
In my
That's
opinion.
a good point.
Or in charge of product, at least.
Yeah, it's also interesting to I never really thought about those two shoes being in the same, obviously.
Same year.
Yeah.
Literally the same year.
Like, that it's happening, but I don't even like thinking about like probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Duck away for a second and grab a slam. Keep talking. Yes.
But like, it's kind of interesting because it's almost like a lot of times, like right now, for instance, like you said, so many people so many of the brands have a very similar aesthetic. And there's always this, like, from a consumer side, oh, so-and-so copied so-and-so, right? And right. I'm sure there are always elements of that might happen, but we're also, like you said, we're all being fed the same things by the algorithm at this point. And it made me think of like Formula One, right? These cars are built to very specific things, but they also have a lot of differences between them. And then they run, 20 cars within 2 to 3 seconds of each other for an hour race or 3-hour race. It's like, it's so minimal, the differences that we see, but like the differences that happen and the path to get to success for a Red Bull team or a Mercedes team is absolutely different than the rest of the field. Right. And I think that probably happens in footwear a lot where, to your point about like having, Adidas or Nike be, those top tier brands. And then you have like everybody else fighting for the rest of that kind of big chunk in the middle. And then obviously, like the brands that are just going to scoop up the $50 and under price point because they know that, hey, this is a consumer that's always going to buy these, whatever shoe that's out there on the market or whatever shoe that's sitting at Kohl's on a discount. Right.
Right.
But it's really interesting to think of those two shoes. And I wonder, like, what at that time, running wise, I can't think of the shoes that were, kind of pushing the envelope in terms of running shoes, because
I think like at that time it would have been obviously Pegasus is always there. Myler, the other pieces. Air Max could be a running shoe at that point. Air Max 01, 2000. Yeah. You had two Nair happening with Air Max 98 and stuff like that. I think the other pieces that were happening, though, would have been more of the trail boom that was going on at that time as well. But I think there was very much a lineage of product in that same, as you were like talking, I was like, oh, like, cause I saw it click with you that, I pointed out that those two are from the same era. I was like, oh, well, let's just grab a Slam. So let's go with Slam. We were looking at May of 2000, right? I went with this one for a specific reason, is if you were a Slam follower back then, the May issue always came out in like March, and realistically it was the All-Star Game breakdown. So let's look at the All-Star Game. We have Vince Carter in the Tai Chi, right? So completely original aesthetic in its own. As we flip the page, we have Iverson in what I believe is either the 3 or the 5. I don't recall, but completely different aesthetic. You have Elton Brand wearing a Pippen 2. We have Jerry Stackhouse wearing his Stackhouse 3. We have Marbury wearing a Kevin Garnett shoe. Here's what's important about all of those. None of them look even remotely alike, right? Yep. Not even a single thing on that page looks like the other one. We get into Shaq as he's in his dunk.net phase. He's going with a gradient yellow and black shoe, completely original to his own aesthetic. Gradients didn't really exist back then.
Yep.
As we turn the page again, we have Kobe wearing an all-star version of what would be just a standard Adidas basketball shoe. But again, doesn't look like anything else. Still doing feet you wear at that time. My point to this is like you have Steve Francis doing like a completely welded like shoe with lines and other pieces that are gradiating and going across it. Everybody had their own original aesthetic. Like that doesn't exist. Like it doesn't. And it's like you turn the page and here's your Flight Posit 1 on Kid in his own colorway. I mean, like, that to me is, I don't know. I don't know. I don't live in that world. Like that's scary to me. Like I get it if you're Nike people, like, cause I just turned the page and here's a young Cincinnati Bearcat Kenyon Martin dunking in the black version of the Flight Posit.
Yep.
Nike establishes the Nike aesthetic and sends it through them. Yeah. Adidas establishes the Adidas aesthetic and sends it through them. Puma and so on, right? But it's like so much right now. Like there was some stuff I saw on court the other day that I was literally guessing as to like what brand it was. And it's because it's all, we're all looking at the same stuff and we're all kind of doing the same thing. And it's like, you don't have enough people challenging that parameter. I think back to some of that early like Jordan and Jumpman stuff, like when they set out, like one shoe that I'm still trying to get is the Jumpman Team J and the Jordan 3%. And they'll come up every once in a while, like unworn and stuff like that. And some of them just want like $700. I'm like, this is worth, I'm the only person that knows about this shoe that's trying to buy it. Like sell it to me for $220 and I'm good. Yep. But like, you have some guy that's going to hold on to it forever. But like all of those shoes took like great risks, like just so unique in the way that they were made. Like, it doesn't, man, like you will struggle to see a Jordan shoe that isn't, like literally isn't a takedown of an 11, 1, 4, or 5 or anything like that. And it's like that's where I see that this stuff has changed in a way that how do you recover from it? Because the volume that they're selling can't be discarded. Like you can't just be like, well, I'm choosing not to sell 3 million pairs now, right? Because it doesn't fit with our brand identity. So it's like, how do you do it? And how do you shift it? I don't have that answer. I'm not a business major. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because the risk takers are almost they're almost inhibited, right? Like from actually taking risk within those lineages where, yes, there was maybe a similar aesthetic between the 3 and the 4 for Jordans, sort of, but it was still a drastically different looking shoe, at the end of the day. And then as you progress through the Jordan line, I mean, what made it exciting is it was like, what's coming next, right? Like you don't know, you almost have no clue of what's coming next. And to your point about the new stuff, it's frustrating for me. Like I love the way the 32 looks aesthetically, but it's frustrating to me that it's tied to a previous Jordan model. Like I just don't, I want it to be
did the launch in Italy, right? Like you know, all that says to me is like just a lack of confidence in what you're doing that you have to tie back to that because it's the only way that it's going to sell. Where it's like, all right, do it in Italy. Cool. Have at it. But let Tate and all those guys that are designing that stuff just run wild with it. Like, what can actually Italy enable in the product, as opposed to trying to make it that way? But like, let's you know, as you were talking some of that stuff, like what kind of like came into my mind was, it's you regardless, footwear anywhere, and shit, Starbucks, McDonald's, I don't care. Like, you have to be a brave soul to be willing to go against the status quo, like to question it in a way of why it's being done. You're gonna have to be willing to fail. You're gonna have to be willing to watch people question and say that you're doing things wrong. And in a corporate environment, man, that's hard. Like, because at the end of the day, like sometimes like what I deal with within my family is I'm flustered with various career points or other pieces. And it's not because the company is bad or anything. It's just because I'm not where I want myself to be at times. And getting other people to understand that and be like, well, you should just be grateful that you have a job. And it's like, well, yes, everybody's grateful that they have it. But sometimes, like when you get into the creative field, like it's your drive to make something different and stay and not losing that fire, like not losing it as you get older and knowing when to push something in a healthy way and keep it going. Like, we're able to critique this solely from a product, but if I'm somebody that's, you know, a designer and I'm listening to it, it could probably hurt some of the stuff that we're saying. But at the end of the day, it's not to take away from them. It's just to hopefully and kind of encourage, where it's like, find your ways to push around that stuff. And I don't know that there's been enough acceptance of that anymore in my view.
Yeah, it feels like we've gotten to a point where, I mean, and even in my work, I think I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day. You know, the worst, as someone who does not work directly for one company for a bulk of my income, the worst request that I can have from a potential client or a client is do what you already did. Like,
yeah, well, then why are you hiring me?
Yeah, like, don't get me wrong. Like, I appreciate that you liked what I've done. I'm very appreciative of that. I'm very appreciative that we can have a conversation. But I'm even if I say yes to this because you say, here's the money, I'm going to be bored with that in a very short amount of time. Even if it's those little things that challenge me.
That you probably like delay starting, you procrastinate like super hard, and then you knock it out in like 12 hours straight and just move on, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah. Well, so I guess like kind of going back to like the thought about the Jordans and the change between, so I guess I say it lovingly and like supportive of, you know, Jordan brand. Obviously it's so important. I don't exist and my life doesn't exist anywhere near what it does now without Jordans and Nike changing everything about the way we consume footwear. But I see all the sales on the retro side and I just like inherently in my mind, I go to cool. This is going to result in people getting to take those chances in other aspects of what happens. And it doesn't seem to happen. And I know that like we're also in another time and space when it comes to businesses and money and numbers and, you know, bottom line and all those things. But, you know, like it's crazy to me because like in footwear, even if you just backed up off of, you know, all the stuff that's going on right now and you look at like kind of the trend of brands that kind of lean so heavily on their legacy product, right? You know, Adidas is a great example of like, they can't possibly make enough superstars and Stan Smiths and Rod Lavers to make money the way they need to make money now versus when they were doing that in the 90s. You know, they rehashed the Stan Smith multiple times. And I get that, like, part of that is always going to be in the mix, but it was like it was a breadwinner for them for a long time to just keep with that legacy product. And then you have like a lull in the long-term effects of the business, in my opinion, because you don't have that follow through on the like the risk-taking product, right? You know, like, I don't know. I'm just kind of,
but I think of like what, let's go broader spectrum here. Like what we're critiquing a lot is, it's unique in itself that we're like, as an idea of what we're talking about, product sales and stuff like that. It's like 2040. It's like 60 years old, right? So like the foundation of like what is meant to be this idea of brand and what we all associate with and make a part of our lives and an extension past us is a very new thing for human civilization. And the reason I bring that up is today the Batman trailer just came out. And if we were to go back to 2005, that's Batman Begins and Christopher Nolan rebooting it. And by 13, we've went through arguably the 3 greatest Batman films ever created, and arguably some of the best comic book, and one of them potentially being a film that is outside the realm of just comic books, right? Just great stories, just beautifully done. And since that time, there's been 4 other reboots of the Batman series. And it's like, how many different ways can we come up with saying the Batman or Batman Begins or Batman, you know what I mean? It's like, but if I'm Warner Brothers, they're like, yeah, just reboot it. It's simple money. All of them are going to go and watch it. Get me a new dark director and let them go and do their thing. Like, there's an element of when you're putting that amount of money into an investment that you're like, well, I want my return, right? I want it to come back. So I tend to actually think of Jordan in different ways. And I actually think, well, you were at Finish Line, I wrote this article for you and Edler, but it was like, why are they not just the Eames of footwear? Like, the reality is none of us really care too much about the on-court product from a lifestyle standpoint. And I'm sure there's basketball players that are listening to this and be like, you're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. That's cool. You're one of the 5% of people that buy the shoe and put it on the court. Great job. But it seems like to me, and I wrote this in the article, like I can't remember what price I chose, but right now, as you know, some of these custom makers are proving that people are willing to spend $3,000 to get a Jordan 1 at any time in the colorway that they want. The reality is that if I were, if I could budget every year that I needed $900 to buy a black and red Jordan 1 because I destroyed it, in the same way that I know that I can get the exact original Eames chair that is black and walnut, and I know that I need $4,800 roughly to do that. I know I need that, and I can do it. Why are we not setting up a business plan around that way? Because they're profiting an extreme amount. They're solving customer data and consumer likelihood of coming back. If I'm somebody that can budget to say that I can get the Concord Jordan 11, right, and go and knock it out. And it's like, maybe you have your 5 to 7 staple shoes, 1, 3, 5, 1, 3, 4, 5, and then throw 11 and like 13 or 14 or something like that in there. And then your hot spots of retro product, you drop in, hey, this year we're doing the 2, get it while you can,
Yep.
Do it that way. It seems like that's an opportunity. And as we talked, a little bit earlier of where you see taking that customer higher and getting that upper echelon of like disposable cash, that's where you probably see it coming into play a little bit more too. That's my opinion. I don't know, but it's just because the way you're doing it, like I know, what was it that came out this weekend that cracked me up? The 97s, that they announced that the 97s were coming back out. Whereas 2 years ago, the Silver Bullet 97 was out. So I'm like, all right, I get another chance to get it, but you're going to make it slightly different. And, it's one of those deals. You're already kind of doing it. Yep. We're all just waiting for Black and Red 11 or Black and Red 1 to come again and some other stuff, right? I mean, you're already doing it. Why not just do it consistently and stop having people be frustrated? Which, from some of the leaked data that came out this weekend, they're clearly seeing that people are willing to leave them now.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. We could kind of, I feel like we could go on about that for quite a while, but it's definitely, to your point, right? We were talking about this years ago in the same sense,
Yeah.
You see various attempts at repositioning something or reinventing something as, the Bin 23 series, which was phenomenal, or, when they maybe did a lesser job of it, calling it the remastered stuff. And, like some of the stuff was great, but some of the stuff was not what we would want to pay as consumers for that product quality wise. And I think
I just read that everything is going up another $20 next year.
And yeah, exactly. And that, and that's another interesting conversation too, because part of that is like, if I'm working at Nike if I'm working at any brand, I'm looking at StockX, I'm looking at GOAT, and I'm looking at eBay, and I'm going, oh, people are paying this for this product. Well, obviously, let's make that product.
Maybe there's that, but I anticipate the cost increases the global supply chain chaos that's happening right now. I can say from a standpoint of shipping a carton of footwear over on like a 20-foot container to a 40-foot container a year ago would have been like, to send 3,000 shoes over would have been like $1,000. Now it's like $23,000. So, Jesus. It's completely different. So I'm sure there's a portion of that.
Yeah. You're probably absolutely right. So I guess like kind of leaning into that basketball conversation, right? Basketball as a whole is not the influence on footwear that it once was, but do you think that something like the Yeezy brand or anybody else that's, really kind of far out there pushing the envelope, like you mentioned Nike ACG, and I'm saying some of the stuff that Reebok did, can we get back to a point where that risk taking happens on the basketball court, or does it even make sense?
I think it has to. At some point, everybody's just the volume's going to be so low, they're going to be willing to pivot. But I don't know. I mean this lovingly to the LeBron team, but like one of my favorite things that I read this year was Gotti sent it to me because we were all critiquing the crap out of Space Jam, predominantly because it wasn't Michael Jordan's Space Jam. The Onion put up like 6th grade or 7-year-old debating to go and see LeBron James' new film based off a New York Times review, right? And like I sit there and look at the new LeBron, and I'm like, this was built for children, like just aesthetically it's beautiful. I'm sure it's so well made. I know it's well engineered, but aesthetically it's a very immature approach, and the way I view it is, in my view, very in line with some of the products have become very much a caricature of what it is. And you brought up the Yeezy stuff, so Yeezy's in the midst of doing their basketball academy, and they've got the 2 new basketball shoes that we saw, and I was talking with a friend Omar about that, and I was because he's kind of one of the other people that buys Yeezys with me that I'll communicate back and forth with. And the first thing I noticed right away, it's a full carbon fiber shank plate. The last basketball shoe didn't have that in it. So then I started looking further. Even though it aesthetically looks very similar, it's a completely different midsole unit. So my point to you is they're taking an aesthetic stretch, but they're actually building a performance basketball shoe, which they weren't doing before. They did not have any of that stuff in it. Will it take off? I think the challenge with that is that basketball is a hard market, and it's tough in that sense. I would like to see more risk taking. I mean, the reality is, as you said, basketball didn't have the influence on it. It does. But the reality is the influence is in the tunnel, and it's the lifestyle stuff that they're wearing. And it's like, when you look at it that way, it's still there. People are still looking to them. Why are we not putting something different on them and get it to go further? I mean, it's like, it's a no-brainer to me. It will come back in the same way that running shoes for years kind of went through. You had stuff, and then boom, the moment like Nike did the sub 2 hour marathon stuff, like that changed running forever. And the way that is going is like, it's not slowing up. They probably need something similar for that for a basketball product. They, not just being Nike, but anybody. Yeah. It needs to be taken back to this serious level, in my opinion. And I'm sorry to critique the LeBron stuff. I'll say the Kyrie, the KD, all that stuff. It's become an expression of those persons as opposed to the tool that they had. That's where we are missing a Kobe line. If I go back to where we kind of talked about something that I would truly miss, I mean, take the human factor out of it. The thing that I miss is that level of innovation that went into every year of like, I mean, it's making a tool for arguably one of the most detailed basketball players ever. Of how they broke down function and issues, and that going away, that problem solving goes away because the value isn't advertised as much, in my view.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting too, because you know, thinking of Kobe and the obsession for the game, right? And this is not
such a good word.
Yeah, this is not to say that they're not, you know, guys that are obsessed with the game now, but it's like your point about talking about Michael Jordan, right? You know, the passion that's on the court, right? If as a leader, you know, for the Wizards, if you're playing and realize that there are people that are playing at this level of talent, at this level of, you know, the NBA, that don't have that crazy obsession, right? Like there's still a big separation between what people care about, even at that level of, you know, sport and athletics and, you know, fame, even celebrity, what all the stuff that comes with it, right? Like people just, you know, some people are probably driven to, you know, this sounds bad, but like get the fit off in the tunnel, right? Like that's equally as important to a lot of people as putting up, you know,
they've been able to get into that world a little bit over the past few years. And that's from every level of player. It's a totally thought about thing. It's interesting. You touch on the Mike thing. I'm going to make a slight joke out of it. Just because I critiqued him as a, you know, being a 40 and 41-year-old and coming back and playing for them. But I want to state like how special that is. And I think it leads into this full conversation because like I'm 37. A few weeks ago, like I run 5 times a week, do about anywhere on the low end, depending on my schedule, of 3.5 miles, and on the high end, 8 miles. It usually ends up right around between 4 and 5, though. That's where I'm at. Just got done Sunday afternoon, ran like 4.5 miles. I come back, Gavin's outside playing basketball, so I join him. I couldn't do shit. Like, I felt miserable. My legs were falling apart. Like, my knees are done. Like, I could barely make a jump shot. Like, anything. And I was like, how? Like, the real feat of Michael Jordan those 2 years on the Wizards was the fact that he played 82 games and, like, did it. And still averaged 24 points. So now let's, like, take the light humor out of it. We talk about risk a lot. Imagine the risk that probably didn't even factor into him. I don't think it for a moment he went through as like, this is going to diminish my legacy. And as much as we all like to say it did, the man still averaged 24 points. Go and look like at today's standard averages. Most of those guys are doing like 25 to 26 points, right? Yep. Even as like the youth of the world taking over. But my point is like he's critiqued on this hard level. That level of risk he did because he felt that that's what was right. That was what was right for his duty at that time for the game of basketball and what he needed to do. We need that. Like, that's what's needed in the product world. And it's part of this is because it's become so big. I mean, it's almost uncontrollable. You can't.
Yeah.
But I also think that that's why you're seeing the success of many other small startups and many other little pieces that are coming in, more so than ever, because it's easier to get. Part of it's easier to get into it from a manufacturing standpoint, but on the other side, it's capable in the sense that there's enough people that have views and opinions that you can connect with the market to allow them to express those views and opinions. I think the great fable of our generation is that we are kind of quote unquote the end of like the S&P 500 generation, right? Where like product sales, drive it, make it huge, make it massive, where it's like, all right, generations below us are like quote unquote the farm and field, like farm and table, right? Where it's like, it's small. This is what I generate. It's enough for me to be wealthy, be happy. I'm content. Like, I don't need to be rich. Like, this is kind of what it is. It's a difference in watching that cultural change happen that hasn't happened in footwear and probably can't happen in some of these big brands that we have because it's going backwards. It would kill them. It wouldn't exist.
Yep. Absolutely agree. And I think that's I wanted to get into this anyway, but this is, we're at a time where let's go back to one of my favorite Kings players in not even recent years, Tyreke Evans, right? Comes into the league, wins Rookie of the Year, averages 25-5. I think one of 4 players or 5 players to do that in the history of the league. Now he's playing for my beloved Kings, which means he's going to win about 30 games, maybe 40 if he's really, really lucky. And nothing's really going to happen from it. And at that time, this is 2010-ish, whatever. Of course, you sign a deal with Nike and you get your logo put on the tongue of a Hyperdunk or Hyperfuse or some variation of a team shoe. And I, at the time, was thinking it was great because frankly, you just, as a Kings fan, you just don't get that at all. But Mitch Richmond aside, being the one guy that got cool stuff in Sacramento, only because he was the thorn in Michael's side for a while. Right. And I think that's what got him there. But I think that it was an interesting time for me to as a fan of footwear, thinking man, I would have rather seen Tyreek do something a little bit different and take a risk to go to a brand that might have given him potentially a signature shoe after that rookie year, or, even just a little bit, they would have taken a little bit more of a risk on him, because there's no risk in signing up for a Hyperdunk, right? It's a check.
Right.
It's a color that you're going to be able to put on your wall and say, hey, this was mine. And the formula works. We know that the formula works. Now, fast forward, 10 or so years, we're getting to see all sorts of people, to your point, with the access to, the manufacturing and the access that we just all have collectively to the knowledge that didn't exist on the internet 10, 15 years ago. It's just a completely different ball game, right? There is no reason, this is just my personal opinion, but there is no reason for any NBA player to just say, cool, I'll take that team shoe from Nike that we know doesn't sell and put my, cool logo on it. And I mean cool logo in the best way possible, because every logo that Nike has ever done for individual athletes has been phenomenal. I think that's something that is totally underrated in the footwear world, is how well the team at Nike throughout the years has done that for people.
We did a post on it, Nick. Yeah, we broke it all down.
Yep. But so, not knowing that you had anything to do with the shoe, we recently went through and did the NBA sneaker signature sneakers. My first pick in kind of our little fantasy mock draft of this year's shoes was Langston Galloway's Ethics LG1. And it turns out that you were heavily involved in that. So
you're kind of involved in it. We've never actually talked about it, but you introduced me to Lang. At
SneakerCon. Yeah,
SneakerCon there. So I'll never forget him coming up, and you're like, "Oh, you should talk to him." And so we started chatting, and I didn't at the time I didn't really know him, and then he reached out. I mean, he was playing in Detroit at the time. Went to dinner with him a lot, and kind of just kept chilling and doing our thing, and. Yeah, I mean, it became the whole thing. So I guess that was when we determined that was 2018. So, yeah, I mean, we're 3 years in the making. Realistically, we're 2 years. We, in April of last year, Senate, we partnered with the manufacturing partner we were going to have, and that's where it went. It's been an extraordinary event. I mean, we have a lot to come yet. I think things got a little bit... rushed isn't the word. We took advantage of the finals, right? So that's kind of how stuff kind of came out, and we put everything out there because it's a great time to put it out there. That's why it's been a little bit quiet, just because it was early, just to flat out state it. But that journey has been extraordinary. You brought up the Hyperdunk stuff. You brought up Nike product and other pieces, and it triggered some stuff. There's a few things. I've been lucky in my life to work with a lot of athletes and a lot of other things and other people that are held on high sneaker ground, right? And when you look at it from that standpoint, what I've learned to find is how you get information out of them that can drive you to create something original. And for me, it's it always starts with conversation. It starts with how you get them to break something down. And Langston is really beautiful in that sense. He's obviously probably one of the top 5, top 3 biggest sneakerheads in the league. PJ gets a lot of that credit, but Lang is pretty damn close. But the point to that is sometimes that type of, in my view, sometimes that type of person can be kind of damning in what their creativity is, because you live off of what you know and what you love. And I kind of came in with a bit of that assumption. But the first time we met, you were in Detroit for a little bit. We met like at a real unsuspected spot. We were at Crispelli's actually. And we were like, he had sketches. Like he had his own, I mean, they were good. They weren't Picasso, but they were good. And like, it was enough to communicate what he wanted. And what it really was about fit and feel. And then, like, I gave my knowledge of helping other people do what we do, of kind of create new footwear. And I was like, hey, if I'm, let me just grab the shoe. If I'm you, like, the main thing is don't like do anything that's welded. Don't do anything that's molded. At the end of the day, like, tooling is what's going to drive your cost up. But on the flip side, like, we could do some really beautiful things that's cut and sew and nobody else is doing it. Right? That's kind of how we approached it. And a lot of our love for details and footwear stuff was very similar. His favorite basketball shoe of all time is Air Jordan 13, as is mine. Like, so it was just pieces of that did not necessarily come into the shoe, but the communication of all that stuff. And then on the flip side, I don't care how this sounds, as much data we've had and as much information that we have on how to create a shoe. Michael Jordan still won 6 NBA championships pretty much without herringbone and was all in leather, suede, and other pieces. Bill Russell won 11 in Chuck Taylors. At the end of the day, we have not truly proven data-wise that a basketball shoe can enable somebody to be better at their sport or their game. So with that, the focus became like about fit, feel, and finish. And you mentioned Concept Kicks. Daniel Bailey, very good friend of mine. One of our quotes is last comes first. Our major focus was creating a last that really, really honed in around the shape to get very modern. That's probably the difference that I note in what cut and sew is and what, say, a knitted shoe or a welded shoe and other pieces can bring to you. So it's like, how do we get something that's closer to the foot, but still makes an aesthetic that's dynamic and, I'm not going to say cost effective. This is not a cheaply made shoe by any means, but it is something that allows us to have a hand quality and handcrafted piece in a time where that doesn't exist.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy too, because I mean, you already said it, but I just want to reiterate, like, the passion for footwear that Lang has. Like, I mean, I remember talking to him the first time and just like, even when he was doing the stuff, with Q4, and it was like, whoa, like, not only is he like one of the nicest people ever, but like the conversation was like, I don't mean this in a bad way, but like, I've been really lucky to talk to, interview athletes and people in the footwear world for a really long time. And the first conversation I had with him was like, this guy gets it, like, on a level that most people don't. Right. And it has that passion for it on a level that most people don't. Kind of like what we started this conversation, with, right? It was like, oh, okay, this is somebody that will be in that, could be in that conversation with us at any given moment. And, marathon conversations and text message chains that last for, years over one little question that sparks all of the stuff. Right. And I just think it's cool that the two of you connected because of that. Right. And that's not to dismiss any of the other people that do these types of things in the footwear world. But like, when you get around people that have that level of passion, and, it's just exciting to know what possibilities exist when you're around those people that have that and are like looking to do something. And obviously, I think that comes through in the shoe, just from the aesthetics and seeing what you guys have done and now getting to talk to you about it.
I think from my side, like, this is not to sound arrogant or above anybody else. This is not what I mean by this statement, but just follow me for a moment. The way I view wealth is I view time. And to me, I have a very grueling day job that I take extraordinarily serious and I never take for granted. And that usually creeps well into my night hours as well. And then I have my family. I'm obviously a husband, and I'm a father as well of two, and I take that time very seriously. Like, so my point is when I kind of take on projects, I highly scrutinize the hell out of them, like because it's ultimately taking away from my personal time. And where Lang was beautiful is it was very similar to how I judge anything. Do you have an opinion? Because there's many people, it's really simple, Nick. It's not that hard to get a prototype shoe made. It's not. I mean, it depends how much you want to spend, but let's just say most expensive, it's like 20 grand. Like, and not to say that 20 grand is not a lot of money, but most people that are doing stuff can figure out how to get that if you play loans or other pieces right. But realistically, you probably need like $6,000 to get a prototype made. Going to a production is a completely different conversation because you obviously have to know how you're going to sell it, where you're going to sell it, how much volume you need of each size, which size it's going to be. And working with a lot of these guys and working with him in particular, I mean, he has a view on all of this. He has an understanding of it. And the other thing that I just deeply valued and appreciated working with him was like how much he took advantage of the NBA PA and everything that it offered of him of education-wise and going past and beyond. He's naturally somebody that questions something in a healthy and respectful way. He's the way that you do it. As we talked about, 20, 30 minutes ago of somebody coming in and questioning an organization, questioning is good. You don't need to come in there and like be like Chappelle after he won the money on Chappelle's show and kicks the garbage can and is like, I'm out. Like, you don't need to do that. When you can come in and be like, well, help me to understand this and I'm going to play this. And like, that's Lang to me. His questions are right in the spot. It's been, from a friendship standpoint, it's been absolutely spectacular and phenomenal. From a product standpoint, we just click and we get it. We have a lot of beautiful, I don't want to get too far ahead of like what it is, but we've got the life cycle laid out for many years to come. I'll state that. And I mean, we're already working on, this isn't it. Like there's more. So, and that's what's been great. We've also been lucky that we have the right partners in manufacturing to help with that as well too. So it's been great.
That's awesome, man. I'm stoked for you guys. I mean, I'm just excited to see, it all kind of come to life, and just see people get their get their feet in them and wear them, because I think to your point earlier, right. And we just had this conversation, the guys on the podcast and I had a conversation recently about some of the stuff that comes out where you absolutely can't tell what a shoe is if it's in a monochrome coloring on the court. And I don't think that you need a crazy branding on a shoe. I get that, like, the swoosh is beautiful. Like, it's, arguably the perfect logo, right? Like,
put it anywhere.
Yeah. But right now there's so many shoes that are out, maybe with the most recent Adidas basketball stuff might be a slight exception to this, but there's a lot of stuff out that you could interchange the logos from the brands and nobody would really know which one was actually came from which brand. And part of that, I think, is like, there's like this, it almost feels like, this sounds terrible, but I'm going to say it because it came to mind. It's almost like the Lululemon thing, right? It's like, This is the performance aesthetic. So we've made a performance aesthetic shoe. Here's what we'll put your color, your logo, your name, whatever, and we put it on the basketball court. And I don't know anything about Lululemon, but that's what comes to mind, is like, they just made it look like performance apparel, right? It's like what Under Armour did,
you look like you could do 20 years ago,
but what's that?
You look like you can run in this. Like, you could do something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But I guess, like, what's the thought process in getting that shoe on foot for the finals? Like, at what point was like that the conversation? Because obviously, as somebody who is like a very casual basketball fan, where like, I'm going to watch I'm going to watch 2 games a week on average, but I'm not going to be like diehard. I absolutely always watch the finals every year, right? Like that's just, you know.
I'm very respectful of his time and like what he does. He's, I mean, it's his profession, right? On the flip side, he's a veteran in the league. I mean, he's had a long run. So my point to you is that what's it look like? I think the way I approached it was trying to handle everything and like get him at the right times of when I truly needed his view and opinion. It was a journey, to say the least. What we were lucky with is the smartest thing we did was we sampled everything in his size.
Nice.
The real difference between a startup company and a major company is there's no R&D budget. You don't have time to what you're making. And so where testing it is interesting, and how you pull in innovation is a challenge. With him, we made it in his sample size, and he was the one that went right to the court with it. That started roughly July. Probably July of 20, and we just started going from there. I think that, again, going back to a lot of our conversation in the beginning, like that's where clear communication came into play. I'm not with him. Like even when he's playing in Detroit, I'm not with him. Access wasn't any easier than it is him playing in Phoenix or anywhere else. So you had to learn how to communicate, text, email, whatever it may be, lots of FaceTime videos, adaptability to cover, and knowing how to get the right information. And both of us knew how to communicate really well. I mean, it's just about sharing what it needed to be. I think when I sit there and think of how it kind of all came together, I mean, it was really pretty beautiful. I'm very thankful and lucky for the experience of it, because it's been fun. You started talking about like graphic and monochromatic. I mean, this was pretty much the colorway that I sketched up from the beginning. So I knew that was going to be one of them. But realistically, knowing that like when you do a new shoe, especially as like a brand new group, even Nike and other bigger companies do it as well. Usually a sole unit lives on past its one lifestyle. So the thing that I focused on as we were doing it was making sure that how we created that sole unit would allow for us to make a different graphic out of shoe 2 and other pieces like that. So, and I not to overstate for them or give away too much information as it is, but the reality was making sure that we're not just thinking of one at a time and thinking past it. So that was the big piece of a lot of this stuff, and he had the mind for it, and he still has the mind for it. So that's where that's been key. And that's not to say that he's different than anybody else or saying that I was surprised by it. It's that you interact with a lot of people that want their own shoe, and that's not just athletes. That's many different people that think they have a view of how they can do something. Very few of them have any thought past what just their own idea is. It's not, and that's what separates success, like in my view. So
yeah, that's some great advice. I mean, honestly, like we could probably wrap up there, but I'm going to ask you one last question, just because. So what's the most exciting thing in footwear right now to you, outside of the Yeezy you just got in hand? The knit runner, for the people that are just listening on the podcast.
I'll give you this. Nike's running product is really special. I mean, that's really changing the world. I will say that. Other stuff would probably be the Heron Preston stuff that they're doing with what's Zeller and all of them in 3D printing it. It will be interesting to see how that changes stuff. I'm going to dig deep on that in a second. Then Pharrell's, I don't know how to enunciate it, but Pharrell's latest shoe is beautiful. I wish I'll buy the blue one probably, but I wish I had the Friends and Family green one. That's the one I want. I don't care for the burgundy one. I mean, that's a direct injected sole unit onto a knitted upper. I mean, it's pretty beautiful shit. That's like what if you go back like mid 2000s, some of the better running product was made by Echo, and like they did the Biome series, and that's essentially what that stuff was. I mean, that's bringing a sole unit as close to the foot as possible, and the feel of it's got to just be impeccable. So that's amazing to me. Audi in general and the way they're handling a lot of stuff is absolutely phenomenal in my view of things. But the Zeller product with Heron Preston and the 3D printed and actually doing that waist, you can manufacture any visual that you want because you don't have to, like I was trying to say, like the draw of this, deep inside this is a stitch. Somehow they're opening this up and stitching that. That is not easy to do. It actually made me shocked that this shoe was only $200. I'm surprised it wasn't more. But anyway, the thing that's surprising me about some of the 3D printed stuff as I'm seeing more stuff come out is it's like they're still kind of making a shoe where it's like they're making like what would be like the midsole line. And it's like,
yeah,
we don't have to do that anymore. Like it's all one piece. Like what do you want it to be? You know what I mean? So that's where I see the encouraging. A lot of people are using Gravity Sketch to do that work which is via Oculus and 3D software of that. That will change how a shoe is manufactured. That will change how many things are manufactured more than just shoes. But that excites the hell out of me, watching a lot of that type of stuff just come to life and seeing. It needs a level of refinement though. Like you can see where some of that stuff is still I mean this lovingly to any student that's listening to it, but it looks like a student project, which is good. It brings excitement to it, but it's missing that like final 10 to 15% that you just get through experience of doing stuff. But those are probably the things that excite me, Nick.
Do you think the 3D printing thing to me is always the exciting piece. I guess it's kind of like the car thing, right? Like it ties into my love of car stuff anyway, because we all have cars that have, even if you're into cars and have had an older car that had any little thing break, that's basically irreplaceable at this point because nobody's going to make old stuff. 3D printing is like, it's feasible to just go get something replaced that you could never have replaced up until the last, say, 5 years. Realistically, probably like 2 or 3 years at a reasonable price. But like, 5 years ago, it was like, oh my God, I can replace this Honda CRX dash piece that is notorious for breaking for a few $100. Now you can probably get it for, hell, you could buy a printer and print it yourself for under $300, probably. Do you think that we'll get, this is, I guess, more philosophical, but like the lack of waste to me is the like the giant, green light of go down this path, right? It's like, if we can figure out how to incorporate these things, like you said, in a way that is aesthetically appealing, beyond just like, I think you mentioned it looking like a shoe. And that's something that I always find fascinating, where it's like, you don't have to make it look the same as we know shoes, which I'm not like a huge Kanye fan. I'm a fan of the things that you talk about him doing, right? Like it's what his brand stands for is something it's, not to be cheesy about the name, but it's outside the box, right? Like it is not the status quo.
Well, I think what you're leading to, it's hard to decipher Kanye for just because Kanye comes in.
Yeah.
Kanye. Yeah. I got you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But do you think that the ultimate drive towards, 3D printing and incorporating that into, obviously for somebody like Nike that's going to make hundreds of thousands of a pair of, Monarchs or something, that's not feasible to print in that capacity yet. But I think from on the marketing side, is it going to be like, hey, this is better for the environment on top of the fact that this is just really cool shit and innovative?
Yeah, the environment piece remains to be seen. I guess if we get to a point where it's all biodegradable, right now it has to be ground up and put back into a polymer.
Yeah.
So that That's not something you or I could do, if we have our own 3D printer. I think the way there's a few things. Ultimately, it's going to come down to cost and time. Cost is obviously there, but the time isn't there yet. So like right now, to do a pair, I just know from what we kicked off on another project of doing a 3D printed shoe on my own. I mean, it's like you're looking somewhere between 12 and 33 hours of printing for a pair, compared to, that's, I can say this way, but that's probably like 3,000 pairs of shoes in the standard way of doing it, right? Yeah. So there's that time and dedication. I think the other piece is like, let's go back to the most revolutionary piece of footwear that probably happened was Flynet or PrimeNet, depending on what side of the world you fall on. So 2012, right? And that aesthetic took over everything. And that, people got tired of that aesthetic. It's now arguably the cheap aesthetic now, like the way it looks, right? But I guess my point that I try to make with it is ultimately footwear consumers, regardless to what age, what demographic you fall in, it's all aesthetic driven. So 3D printing will obviously have a huge impact. But at some point, that aesthetic will not be the desired aesthetic. I think as we talk about sustainability and other pieces like that, all areas of manufacturing comes into play. But the real question should be, is determining, does this damn product need to be made? And if you're going to make it, how are you going to do it in the best way possible? Just low-hanging fruit. I think the latest Curry has like 18 colorways. Like, do we, we grew up with the Jordan 11. That's the most heralded basketball shoe ever. Black, white, black and red. Like, the point that I'm trying to make with that is like the impact is there if you do it properly. Now it's to a point where that level of colorways, Under Armour didn't do anything wrong. It's what's expected of them. But my statement to you with all this stuff is it's just questioning in the right way and determining what's needed and what's not needed and how you're going to do it. Do I think 3D printing becomes the dominant piece? Probably not. I could see it becoming the component. I mean, if we were to re-engineer a flight posit, why wouldn't you just 3D print that entire chassis and then stitch the booty in, right? Or like the Zavojka, like that entire silicone piece could be 3D printed now. The heel counter on a Hyperdunk, boom, 3D print, put it in there. I think it becomes elements like that, in my opinion, at some point. I do think you will see Nike's already done it with their running one that they did that was right around the time of the, I don't remember what they called it, but it can be done, but it's time, energy, and effort. I think the real story is how you utilize it to enable the athlete and enable the person that's wearing it. In theory, all of us have the software or can have the software on our phone to turn our phone into a 3D scanner. I mean, think about it as everything goes online, 3D scan that thing and like send it to have the shoe made around you. Like that's where it becomes key, because no matter what, all of us have a different foot and we're all forcing it into one standard way of it being made. So that's kind of where I see things changing.
Okay. So that means I have one more question for you, because
that's fine.
the Virgil Jordan 2, right? The kind of the big selling point is, at least from my understanding, from him commenting on stuff, is that it was an original Jordan 2 that Michael had that was 3D scanned, right?
Yeah.
And like,
we pulled it out of the pyramids. It's King Tut's shoe, and we went and scanned it so we can put it in the Metropolitan Museum of Art and have a whole thesis on why it's decaying the way it is. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so I feel the same way, right? I feel like, okay, I get that this is like the story, the selling point, it's everything, right? Like I wouldn't necessarily want a shoe that looks like it's crumbled to wear. Like if I had an original Jordan 2 made in Italy and I wanted to, and that was my favorite shoe and I wanted to have it on the wall, and display it, then I get it. But like, I don't like, I guess like that's like one of the things that I'm wondering is like to the 3D scanning conversation, right? Like that's what you chose to 3D scan and recreate. And then like, is this now going to inspire the, you know, the customizers that put their own logo in place of the swoosh on a Jordan 1 to like download that software, 3D scan a shoe and
Jordan 1 soles? God, that would make me happy. Here's what I take from it, Nick. Like, a lot of them follow me and they're good people and I should probably be more in line with some of it. But most of the Instagram chain that Virgil was responding on, like, I'll be real, it's a bunch of people that have fallen so in love with Michael Jordan that they want every piece that's directly tied to who he is. This is nothing different than Upper Deck releasing Michael Jordan's jersey in a fucking sports card. Like, that's all this really is. This isn't footwear innovation. That's not what any of it is. My personal opinion with it, and I wrote on that chain and didn't get any response from Virgil, but I got it from others, like, well, you guys are just living off of nostalgia. Like, if that's what you want, like, if you want to recapture nostalgia and keep selling it to the 45-year-olds that wish Michael Jordan was still playing basketball and repost, you know, Michael dunking in twos on Tuesday and MJ Mondays and like all this other stuff, but as opposed to embracing the new group because we all want to think it's 1996 and we're still 72-10. But it's like, I struggle with that stuff. Like, I can let that past die. Like, it was very important. It meant the world to me. It still makes me feel good. But we keep going back to the same stuff to create something new. We're not creating anything new. That's not new. I'll critique Virgil on this sense. I think the man's a vision. If I think his most important piece is probably how he's enabled other people to become creative, I think he would probably, in my opinion, I think he's more of a curator than he is like a true vision. But that's important and that's really good and that's what he's done. I think that Nike has probably kept him in a box where his aesthetic is the same thing every time because it's what is expected it to be. Like when they first did the collection of the 10, I heralded that shit. Like, I thought it was incredible. Like, because he basically took the internals of a shoe and how it was made and displayed it, which is very much what, you know, the architecture that he was in love with and studied and stuff. I think that's important. We haven't grown from there, though. In 4 years, we haven't grown from any of that. We're still doing the same thing. And now, you know, we're going back and retelling a story to the kids of today. And it's like, well, why do the kids need to know of a mediocre shoe in the Jordan line from 1987 that, I hate to break it to people, we all like it and have like the nerdy side of it, but it didn't sell well and it didn't do well. And I think if we were to get Michael's real critique of it, he about left the company because of it. So it's not like that. That piece probably isn't that important to tell the children and like let the youth grow on and let the kids see for today. So to have it scanned and then have Michael rewrite his name, you know, 40 times and we picked the best variation of it and put it on there, like, come on, man. This is like the same shit that we were buying of Upper Deck basketball cards when we were younger. This isn't footwear. Like, this isn't what it's supposed to be. Name it what it is. It is that piece for you to put in your collection. It is not meant to be worn. It's nothing more than that. And you know, if I get some hot takes out of that for being rude or damning, it's not that, but it's not like we're not changing the world with that shoe. And in my opinion, he has the opportunity to change the world with his presence and his power and what it is. And that's what was chose to be done. Is it an anomaly in the Jordan line? Absolutely. No doubt. But I don't know. I don't have any value for it in that sense, Nick. But everything's subjective. Art's subjective. So, you know.
Yeah, definitely, man. And I think it's interesting too for me personally, just because, you know, obviously sneaker history being like all nostalgia for the most part, right? And that's part of why I enjoy talking to you and you know, like, even me personally, like I have like, I don't want to say second, you know, like I'm not like second guessing what I do. Cause like really this is just a side project for me to talk to my friends about sneakers all the time. But the name itself is like, I'm at the point of questioning like, man, maybe we should change it to something different just because I don't want it to always be repeating the same old, right? Like, don't get me wrong. Some of that stuff is fun. And like, now that I have nephews that are coming up to that age of starting to play basketball regularly, it's like, okay, cool. I get to talk to them and share some of these things with them. So it's a weird thing for me because it's like the nostalgia is important to me, but at the same time, I'm kind of bored with it the same way I am all the dunks, even all the Reebok questions. Like, it's not just Nike. This is like, the same kind of stuff that we were talking about earlier, where it's like, just everybody kind of looked at Nike and was like, well, that's the formula. Let's try to do the formula there. And,
sure.
I'm glad you said too, because I think Virgil is like incredibly creative, but I see it from like I've worked in a business like this before, and it's now just rehashing the same formula, which is so frustrating. Cause like, if somebody can push that different vision, it is him. It's like, people are like, they're going to bow down to him because he's the one that's moved the needle so much in the last 4 years. I don't think anybody else has, maybe other than Kanye, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and financially, he doesn't have to say yes. So then you have to wonder if it's just like a licensing deal, and regardless of his input or not, they're going to do something. Because realistically, the formula that they're doing, they don't need to involve him. They need him to sign off on it. But you're critiquing the name and everything like that. If I didn't know, no, I don't think you need to change the name. You didn't ask me that, but just giving my own opinion on it, because it's like, to me, if I didn't know the history as deep as I would, I didn't know how to create the future or have an opinion on what the future should be, I should say. So history is definitely important. The reality is that people need to be willing to use history to create their future, and not necessarily just sit there and recreate. They need to be able to challenge what they need and what they should do. And that's how you use it in the brightest way. That's the reason why we learned about history in school in general, is to understand what you need to do for the future. I think the worry that I have is that we just have a bunch of shoes right now. We don't have any real product. And that's, it's grown too big. As we talk about sustainability, it's downsizing. That's the real answer, and getting it to the right amount of product that we need it to be. That's how I look at it. And hopefully people can utilize your podcast and learn about that history to know these were the ones that stuck. What am I doing now? Because I can tell you right now, doing another Jordan 1 colorway isn't going to be the one that's it. Like, if anything, it's so cluttered you won't remember what they are,
Yep. Yeah, 100% agree. Actually, I don't know if you listened to Business Wars, but
I do not. Yeah,
there's a podcast called Business Wars. I can't remember the name of the host, but it's a pretty well funded, famous kind of documentary organization behind it. But they're actually, and if you're listening to this podcast and you stuck it out to the end, like, it's worth listening. It's basically, I think they recently started one on fast fashion and the kind of the downsides to that, the way that the brands have, and this is, brands like H&M and Forever 21 and stuff like that, where they're churning out hundreds of thousands of pieces every month for, where the excess, they have so much excess product that they're literally incinerating it because they just can't get rid of it. And, obviously a conversation for another time, but worth listening to if you're listening to this and, you want to learn a little bit more about how just crazy the world of mass production and overproduction is. But
it's sad. I don't know what the right answer is. It's sad, but they're in a spot where they don't know how to stop.
Yep. Well, man, I really appreciate you spending a couple hours with me and chatting. This has been awesome, as it always is. I honestly, like we just need to do this on a much more regular basis as opposed to the every 6 to 9 months. So
it feels really good in my heart. Like it feels like I get a lot off my chest. Yeah, no, that's good.
Yeah.
Like I'm down. I'll do it. Yeah.
And so definitely let everybody know where they can find you too, so they can find you, on social and stuff.
Yeah, just hit me up on Instagram. You can find me at Golliff. But outside of that, like I kind of work my way through some stuff every once in a while. But just hit me up on Instagram at Golliff, or if you really want to talk to me, just email me at bgolliff@gmail. Any of it. Yeah. It's fun.
Cool, man. Thanks everybody for listening, tuning in, watching, wherever you're taking this in. Make sure you connect with Brett, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Peace.
Yes, later.